Hello and welcome back to Stat 3050 at the University of Wyoming online, having a great time, right? We've got some new PowerPoints here. We've got some new material. We're going to be learning all about R in the next 87 slides. I promise it's not actually like a true 87. There's a couple of transition things in there. So I promise it's not going to be too long. Also, I'm going to be splitting this whole presentation up into a bunch of smaller bite-sized pieces, so you don't have to navigate through like a 50-minute long video just to get the one thing you need. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so we use R in statistics, specifically in this department, and also, tons of industry uses it too, because it's super, super powerful. You can do a ton. Oh my gosh, you can do a ton with it. However, it is like learning a language. It's a programming language, quote unquote. So I like to teach it like a language, kind of like if you were to take a Spanish class or a Latin class or whatever, French. I teach it in the same way, okay? And you'll see some similarities here. So at first, we're going to be starting it as R as a language, and then we're going to be getting into R as a tool. Okay, so let's just kind of get into the basic syntax of what exactly we're doing here, right? So R is composed of your normal kind of language things, your structures in language. You've got syntax, you have grammar, and you have vocabulary, right? Syntax is the most important, right? Because you don't want to get words out of order, or else you can't say exactly what you want to say. Grammar is also important because you've got some functional things in language that do certain jobs, and you have other things that do other jobs. And then vocabulary, right? Vocabulary is essentially the more you know, the more vocabulary you know, the more you can do, the more you can say, right? You can get away with a very limited vocabulary, but the more you know, the better, right? At least in this instance, okay? So here's some basic English syntax. In English, now, of course, I'm not an English teacher, I'm a statistics teacher, but if you've ever taken a lit class or whatever in elementary school, you learn that English has these kind of four components, or at least the version of English that I speak. You have nouns, verbs, adjectives and adverbs, and objects, okay? So the example here that I've given is Carson gets a blonde wig. Okay, so if you've seen a picture of me, you know that I maybe need a wig, or at least a toupee or something. But this has all of this sentence here has all of the components that I've listed here above. Carson gets, all right, so you've got the noun and the verb, and then an adjective, a blonde, and then a wig, which is an object, right? Well, it turns out that in R and in most other programming languages, we have a similar structure, okay? R, in fact, has the same four basic components: nouns, verbs, kind of modifiers, adjectives and adverbs, and then functions instead of objects, okay? Now, I'm going to be kind of, if you saw the note on the first slide, I'm going to be kind of going back and forth between certain terms. Totally fine. I'm just trying to relate this back to English. Functions and objects and stuff are a little bit different in R as it is in English, but we'll get to that in just a little bit, right? So, just to make a little comparison, I've crossed off all of the things that I don't really care about, and the same thing with R, right? Okay. So here is just a tiny bit of pretend code, pseudocode, we could say. This is what R looks like, at least line by line, right? And we have actually the same components that I had earlier, okay? And I've got them kind of listed right here as well on line 5. So I've got line 3 here is what's actually happening, and line 5 sort of is just the pretend nuts and bolts, right? So Carson, right? That's the noun here. That's the thing that we're caring about, or at least I care about. And then we've got all the other stuff. So let's actually kind of take a look. Let's see. Nope. Here. So this sentence and the stuff I have in R is the same. Okay. So Carson gets a blonde wig. So in fact, let me just take that and let me put it right here. Cool. Okay. So Carson gets a blonde wig. That's the English translation of this line right here. And we kind of see everything that we need except for one thing. Where's the verb? Where's the action here? I see Carson. I see the sort of noun here. I see the object and I see the modifier, all right? Well, the verb just happens to be this arrow right here in the middle, okay? And in R, I kind of go back and forth between translating things into R or from R into English. That arrow means gets, okay? So Carson gets a blonde wig, okay? And sort of the general structure here is that this is the thing that I'm modifying. This is the thing that I'm kind of creating, okay? And then this is the actual thing that I'm giving to Carson. And then we just put in the specifics, right? There may be instances where I don't necessarily need the inside bit, right? I could just be getting a wig, right? And that would be bare bones. All we would need to know that I'm the one who's getting the wig. But adding this modifier in here makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more specific to know that, okay, now I'm getting a not just a basic wig, but I'm getting a blonde wig, right? It'll bring out the blue in my eyes, okay? And that's kind of the general idea, that this is true, this kind of structure here, this is true for almost everything in R. Of course, there's always going to be some exceptions, but this is the general idea, which is pretty great, I think. Okay, so a little bit more complex. Again, this would not work. Well, maybe it would, but for right now, we're not working with any actual data or anything like that. This is just an example, right? So what's the English translation of the following? And we've got this line of code here. Pause the video if you want. You don't have to. The little hint here, LM, parentheses, translates to, in English, linear regression model or just linear model. Again, we'll get into that in just a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean a few months. But let's try to translate this, right? So we've got linear model gets, okay, and then this function right here, this sort of thing right here, a linear model made up of my data, and I've called it my data, where y is a function of x, okay? Again, a little bit advanced, no need to worry, but this is the general idea, right? We have some left-hand side and we have some right-hand side. The left-hand side, we can name whatever we want. The right-hand side has some fixed name for the function. And then within, we can sort of denote some modifiers, some more specific information, okay? Sometimes it's necessary. Like this, we always need to specify data, at least when we're using this function. But the formula is something that is sometimes we can leave up to the default settings. Again, whatever. Who cares about all of the details right now? I know that I don't, and you probably don't either, and that's okay. That is totally fine. Okay. Of course, though, we need to figure out what exactly we're working with. We're working with data. We work with data every day in this class, okay? And we've got some examples here, okay? So on line 3 here, on line 3, I have some object called my data, okay? And I'm calling it my data. You could call it whatever you want. You could call it my data. You can call it dat. You can call it data. You can call it whatever. It's always good to know, have good naming conventions just so you don't get confused when we start getting into tons and tons of storing objects and stuff. Okay, and then I'm saying, okay, my data is going to get, and then this function is going to read the CSV file or Excel file, a kind of a basic Excel file, and then where it's stored. Easy enough, right? And then the same thing here, we've got a head. This is the function where it's going to read the first 6 observations from my data. See, so I've got my data, line 3 here, chucked into the function here on line 5, and it spits out the variable name and observation number for the first 6. Pretty easy, right? This function is very handy. Now you'll probably notice that this function here, what's on line 5, doesn't have that traditional sort of left hand, right hand side. Sometimes we don't really care about storing things. For instance, if we were to just use read.csv and then where the file is, it would just print out all of the data and not store it anywhere. Okay, so in that case, we do want to store the data, but in this case, we don't necessarily care about storing the first 6. Sometimes you might want to do that, but in this case, it's just kind of a check. Okay. So same kind of deal here. Just another translation of that linear model. We'll skip over this for now, again, because I don't want you getting hung up on exactly the details in here, because we're not going to get to this for a while. I just want you to kind of see the overall structure of R and how to create things and store things. Okay, very cool, right? So it's the same stuff, my data, getting the stuff from read.csv, my file, right? And this is going to just spit out the first 6, and I'll show you where that does it in a second. And then we've got linear model being stored, right? So y is a function of x. Again, not totally important, but if I wanted to store this, I would do exactly this, right? If I wanted to store the information that's getting kind of calculated here, then I would put it into this object. However, if I just wanted to get it spat out, for a quick kind of thing, then I would just run this. I wouldn't worry about storing it. Okay, and then we see that these things get stored in our environment. Okay, what the heck? An environment, a script. What is all this? A console? Good Lord. Well, let me show you. So if you've downloaded R, which I hope you have, it's kind of important now, and R Studio, this is what you'll see. Okay, so we've got sort of 4 big windows, and each one is important, and each one contributes their own. So we'll just kind of we'll take it clockwise. No, we'll take it counterclockwise, and we'll start over here. Okay, so what this window here is called, this is your script. Okay, and this is where you type things in, and then you have to hit Control Enter to run it. It's not going to run once you move on to a new line. I kind of like to keep this as kind of like a scrap, kind of like a rough draft, scrap sheet of paper. This is always being edited. This is always being kind of manipulated. This is always being changed. Okay, and then eventually, when you're finally satisfied with everything runs. You've got a nice clean script. You could run that over and over and over again, and it would never not work. Okay, which is great, right? So you keep this for all of your work once you're done kind of cleaning everything up. Now, every time you run something from the script, it gets spat down here in what's called the console. Okay, and we've got this little window right here. And it's made up of these kind of 3 windows, or these panes here. Just stick with console for now. There's really nothing we need to worry about in the terminal or the jobs. This is when you're running, jobs is for when you're running big things. Terminal is for when you're trying to be fancy. I'm taking a quick coffee break. Hold on. Oh yeah, perfect. Okay, I feel rejuvenated already. So anyway, every time you run something in the script, well, it turns out that it gets spat into here, into the console. And it's more or less kind of like a history of what you're doing. You can also run things line by line in here, but they disappear, right? So if you're just trying to maybe see the first 6 observations of your data, boom, you put it on in here, okay? There's really no need to put it up in the script. Okay, here in this window, in the bottom right, we've got where plots show up. And actually, I'll show you a little bit more because there's some panes in here that are kind of helpful. But this is where your figures show up, and we're going to be making a lot of figures here in the first little bit. And then, last but not least, we have our environment. Okay, and we'll just worry about the environment tab for now. This is just where all of the stuff that gets stored from your script gets saved, and you can kind of peruse at your leisure in here, right? And we can kind of see that it stores things alphabetically and numerically. Okay, so environment, and then environment 1, environment 10, environment 11. If we had a 2, it would be in between 1 and 10, right? Okay, very cool. So let me just kind of see what's next here. Okay, so I'm actually going to leave. I'm gonna pause the video, make a new one. But this is the general idea. Again, if this totally went over your head, I know R has kind of a steep learning curve, and that's okay. It took me a little bit to learn it, but I promise that after you get a little bit of practice, it'll be second nature in no time. And then you'll put it on your resume, and you'll be a millionaire, or at least 100,000-aire in at least 5 years, I promise. And but don't hold me to that. Okay. Okay. So I will catch you. I'll catch you in the next one.